Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Von Manor and the main event. Today, we're going to be talking about the epic battle between Conan and Tarzan. Yes, two of the greatest adventure characters in all of literature. Conan the Barbarian, created by Robert E. Howard, and Tarzan of the Apes, created by Edgar Rice Burroughs. What would happen if these two great characters came head to head and fought? You know, I'm a deep thinker, so of course I think about this kind of stuff. And these are two of my favorite characters of all time, so of course I've thought about this hypothetical situation. What would happen if these two got into a fight? It would be an epic battle, that's for sure. But who would walk away from this fight? Well, let's talk a little bit about it and figure it out. I think I've got it figured out. But we'll see, But let's talk a little bit about these characters first, because we are talking about the characters from the books, not the characters from the movies. Both of these characters you probably know more from the movies than from the books. And those characters are not the characters from the books. Characters from the books are much different. For example, both of these characters, Tarzan and Conan, are really, really intelligent characters. They had to be in order to survive. And they are both survivors, these characters. And they do actually have a lot of similarities. But let's just talk a little bit about these characters first. This is Tarzan of the Apes. Tarzan, created by Edgar Rice Burroughs, first appeared in book form in 1912. So Robert E. Howard was 6 years old when the first book of Tarzan was released. And Robert E. Howard, unfortunately, did not live very long. He passed away at the age of 30. And all his life, from the time that he was 6, thereabouts, there were new Tarzan novels being released. So it's interesting to think about. As Robert E. Howard was growing up, he was very familiar with Edgar Rice Burroughs, who's very popular all throughout Robert E. Howard's lifetime. And he was very familiar with Tarzan. Tarzan was an undoubted influence on Robert E. Howard's work. Edgar Rice Burroughs, his work was a great influence on Robert E. Howard. Robert E. Howard probably read just about everything that Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote. And like I said, even after Robert E. Howard passed away, there were still Tarzan's stories and novels coming out. Altogether, there were 24 books of Tarzan. So a lot of Tarzan was out there. Conan, the first Conan story, was published in Weird Tales in 1932. But Conan was only published for a few years. Altogether, I believe there are 18 stories of Conan. Only one full-length Conan novel. Everything Conan can fit in this one volume. This is everything Conan. This is only the first 6 books, I believe, of Tarzan are in here. Let me double check. Yeah, this is the first 6 books of Tarzan. But remember, there are 24 of them, so it just goes on from here. But everything Conan is in here. But despite there not being nearly as much Conan as there is of Tarzan, Conan nowadays is probably at least as well known, or close to being as well known, as Tarzan is. I think Conan has probably aged a little better culturally. I think Conan probably is a more popular character now, that's for sure. But both very important action hero characters, adventure characters. So, of course, Tarzan was an orphan who was raised in the jungles of Africa by apes. And he didn't see another human being until he was 18 years old. From there, he actually discovered that he was the Lord Greystoke. An important guy, Lord Greystoke. And so Tarzan was interesting. Like I said, really, really intelligent character. Very good with languages. He can learn languages relatively fast. He learned French actually before he learned English. So throughout his life, he spoke English with a French accent, which is an interesting thing to think about. But he was Lord Greystoke, an English lord, who spent a lot of time in the jungles having adventures and a lot of time on his estates. And he was never fully at home in either place. He was always a little bit outside of wherever he was. He was never fully satisfied in the jungles. He was never fully satisfied in civilization. And he was never really civilized. At heart, Tarzan was always more of a savage animal than a human at heart. And these books are actually very, very violent. There's a lot of violence in these stories, a lot of action. He was savage, Tarzan was. And of course, Conan was a barbarian. Again, a very, very intelligent man, Conan. Tarzan actually was probably a more noble character than Conan. Tarzan had more of a natural nobility to him. Conan was a pretty self-serving character for the most part, but with a code of conduct, let us say. But he always did look out for number one, Conan did. However, this is a character who started off with nothing. He started off a thief in the streets and eventually became a king of the greatest empire in his world. And throughout that time, he had many different jobs, Conan did. Fighting was his business, so he spent a lot of time as a bandit chief, as a mercenary general. The more power and authority he got, the more serious he was about it. He did take his responsibilities seriously, so that when he became king, he could not just abandon his subjects, even though he found being a king kind of a drag. He felt responsible for his subjects. So even though he was self-serving, decent guy, and a great action hero, this guy fought all kinds of supernatural menaces throughout his life, as well as, you know, many, many different human foes and wizards and other kinds of things throughout his career. And he always came out on top. It's hard to get tougher than this guy. So, in actual combat, between these two, who would win? A lot of people, I think, would give the edge to Conan, because of the films and the comics, I think, we get the idea that Conan was a lot bigger and probably stronger than Tarzan, but that is not really the case if you read the books. You will find that Tarzan fought many, many different animals. This guy fought apes like all the time, armed only with a knife. He would fight apes, he would fight lions, he would fight all kinds of creatures, as well as human enemies. Incredibly strong, incredibly fast. Both of these characters have been described as giants, so they towered above everybody else that they were around. Both very big, strong, muscular men. Both experienced in combat. Although Tarzan more so with animals. Conan more so with human beings. So if these two were to get into an actual fight, who would win? It would be close. Like I said, I've thought about this. And I believe, you might disagree, but I believe it really depends on the circumstances of how they fight. Now, if they are armed, even with just a knife, which was Tarzan's weapon of choice, if they are armed, Conan, I believe, has the advantage. Conan was an expert with every weapon, every edged weapon you could come across. Knife, axe, sword, you name it. This guy had a ton of experience fighting with those weapons. He was a master with that kind of stuff. So I believe if these guys came and fought with any kind of weapon, if Conan had a weapon, I think he would take out Tarzan. However, if they were unarmed and they were just fighting one-on-one, I think the edge would go to Tarzan. I think Tarzan could take Conan out because I believe Tarzan was probably at least as strong as Conan physically. He would have to have survived what he survived. And he was used to wrestling, like I said, with all kinds of animals and other creatures, all kinds of creatures. And you get the sense that he was probably faster and more agile than Conan was. It's hard to say just from reading the books if that's true, but I feel that he probably would have the edge. I think to have survived what he survived with as little as he had to survive with, he would have that edge. So I think in unarmed combat, Tarzan would win. So yeah, there you go. Armed with any kind of weapon, Conan takes it. He could take out Tarzan. But unarmed, in unarmed combat, Tarzan would surely win, I think. So there you go. And now I'm done holding up my very heavy centenary editions of both of these characters. And I believe that's the answer. Now, if you disagree, let me know what you think. I would be happy to hear your opinions. Okay, tomorrow, something a little bit more serious. Not much more, but a little bit. I will see you next time.